Story 1. When we started our set at a wedding, everyone ran outside and disappeared for the rest of the night. I assumed they disliked us. But afterward the bride said a huge fight had broken out involving multiple members of both families, and people left upset, injured, or in a police van. We could not stop playing because we were paid and it was our job. The only person watching was a drunk uncle dancing alone and requesting songs we did not know. Story 2. I had not been born yet, but my parents rented the observation deck on the Hancock Building in Boston for their reception. It was the tallest building in the city with a beautiful view. My father pored over historic weather charts to choose the day that was statistically most likely to be nice. On the day of the wedding, of course, there was thick fog unlike anything they had ever seen. They could not see a thing out of the windows of the room they had chosen specifically for the view. It worked out well, though. They were happily married for nearly 30 years before my father died of cancer a few years ago. There is one other funny anecdote from that wedding. The ceremony was held in King's Chapel, an incredibly historic church in downtown Boston that is a major tourist attraction. Closing the church on a weekend afternoon for a wedding turned out not to be very expensive. The tourists waiting outside did not know that, and someone started a rumor that my parents were incredibly wealthy, possibly even Kennedys. As a result, many people took photos of them when they left the ceremony. I am not sure if any of those people ever discovered that my parents were not rich or famous. Story 3. When I was 6 or 7, I went to a cousin's wedding. Everything was fabulous for little me. So much sugar, it felt like heaven. The reception was in a large community center reserved for the occasion. I went to the girls' bathroom, and as I passed the men's room, I saw my uncle on the floor. I returned to the main room and told my dad that my uncle looked unwell. He suffered a stroke and died. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying, and everyone except close family members left. The bright side is that the marriage is still going strong 20 years later despite what happened that day. Story 4. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after being given a terminal diagnosis. It was uncertain whether he would be well enough to attend, and in the end he was too unwell, despite wishing he could. As we arrived at the reception, my friend was informed that his father had passed away. It was devastating. Story 5. My dad and stepmom's wedding was a disaster. For context, her family had been terrible on both sides. An abusive father, a neglectful alcoholic mother, and step-parents who did not care for her. She had run to my father to get away when she was 15. The bigger problem was that my father was 26 and abusive. He was a deeply troubled person. On his side, he hated his mother and blamed her for everything wrong in his life, as he later did to my stepmom. The wedding was doomed. It started when my stepmom was walking down the aisle. She had reconnected with her father in the last year and had recently been in a fight with her stepfather. So only her father walked her. There was a branch in the way at the outdoor venue. He pulled it out of the way for her. As she thanked him, he let go, flung the branch back into her face, and collapsed laughing. She awkwardly chuckled, knowing he would get mad if she showed she was upset. The day continued, but she was visibly shaken. After the toasts, some people did not drink the champagne that had been set out. She had asked her mother not to drink. She was given sparkling juice instead of champagne. While the bride was changing into her reception dress, her mother went table to table drinking as much alcohol as she could. A cousin, unaware of what was happening, started chanting chug, 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 and the bride returned to her mother, who was finishing another drink and denying everything. The cousin slipped out of the tent once he realized what was happening and left them alone to argue. The bride came out crying a few minutes later, returned to her car, and did not come back for about 20 minutes. While that was happening, my grandmother arrived and began yelling at my father about many things, including marrying someone she disliked, not allowing her to invite a friend to the wedding, and him owing her money. My father told her to leave, and she did. Later, my father became angry that my stepmom had been gone so long and accused her of either being overly emotional or of lying and cheating. She sat at the edge of the crowd, trying not to cry while remaining visible to him for the next several hours. They had been together for 10 years, but the marriage lasted only 6 months. Story 6. I've catered many weddings, and there have been some memorable ones. Fights between guests, wedding cakes falling over, red wine spilled on wedding dresses. The lot. The one I'll never forget was an all-day event. A small ceremony with a few close friends and family, and a big reception in the same venue with a huge buffet. Every type of food you could imagine, and a free bar. They had booked and paid for 250 evening guests, but only about 30 turned up. My heart broke for the couple. A massive, beautiful converted barn, loads of food and drinks, great music, but no guests. By about 10 p.m., with the venue licensed until 11 p.m., the buffet had barely been touched. The few who were there ate, but it hardly made a dent because it had been planned for so many more people. I asked the mother of the bride if she wanted me to cover and refrigerate the untouched food so the couple could take it home. Her response, "Oh no, there are still a lot of people coming," was the most awkward moment of my life. No more guests showed. A flash of car headlights in the distance at about 10:30 p.m. made the bride beam when she thought latecomers were arriving, but it was just taxis coming to pick up the few who were there. It is the only event I have done where we did not have to ask people to leave. At 11 p.m., the place was empty. In a nutshell, the bride's parents paid for the day and the couple had zero control over their guest list. Her parents invited all their friends to the evening function, but in reality it was mainly associates they wanted to show off to, so no one felt obliged to attend a wedding where they did not know the bride or groom. It turned into essentially a networking event for the bride's parents. For those asking, I believe the guests did respond to the invitation, but instead of a handful deciding not to come, the majority chose not to attend. Story 7. I used to do catering work. One time my boss sent me to a remote location in the woods by a beautiful river. While we were loading the truck, I learned the boss would not be going and that I was essentially in charge. He had promised that everything was taken care of, set up, and so on. So you can imagine my surprise when I arrived and nothing was set up. We were only about an hour early, so I frantically started trying to get the tent in order. We needed extension cords for the coffee and tea, but there were none. We needed tables to set up the food, but there were none. I somehow improvised everything that was missing, and just as the bride and groom arrived, we blew the fuse for our only power source and the place was plunged into darkness. We reset the breaker and I moved some equipment around. We blew the fuse again. This delicate dance continued for the entire evening, through the speeches and the first dance. The worst part was when we went to rinse the dishes before boxing them up and discovered that blowing the fuses had stopped the water pump and it needed to be primed again. At that point I said forget about it, we would take them back dirty. The crew and I spent several more hours after the long drive home washing them. That day I worked a 15-hour shift without a break and still felt like I had ruined the wedding. Needless to say, I quit that job. Story 8. I was best man at my sister-in-law's wedding. I had stepped in for the groom's brother. That's another story. For a year of planning, all the bride wanted was a dove release, while they read handwritten vows to each other. It was a very small, non-denominational wedding. Most of the family were atheists. On the day of the wedding, in early summer, something was off with the bird handlers. They arrived late and were asking the wedding party for help getting everything in place. When it came time for the vows, I helped the handler carry the chest with the doves to the altar where the bride and groom were standing. As the vows were finishing, the handler gave me the signal to open the chest. I opened it and saw 20 to 30 dead doves in the crate. I immediately closed it to try to limit who knew what had happened, but it was too late. The bride's look of horror said it all. We spent the next few hours trying to cheer everyone up, but by the end of the reception the wedding party had organized and filed animal cruelty complaints against the handler. It dominated the conversation. Story 9. The groom's mother had struggled with alcohol for many years. She stopped drinking suddenly a few days before his wedding. During the reception, she had a seizure and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. Story 10. The wedding was at a state park famous for its giant gorge and waterfall. Someone suggested taking a photo overlooking the gorge, and everyone agreed. The wedding party went around a stone barrier, and the maid of honor fell from the cliff to her death. The drop was approximately 500 feet. Story 11. I attended a wedding reception and was seated near the cameraman. An aunt of mine sat closer to the camera and spent the evening commenting and gossiping about everyone, much of which ended up on the recording. The cameraman was great. He made 2 copies, one edited and one unedited. The unedited version is the stuff of legend. Story 12. No one turned up to the reception except my partner and me. There were about 8 people in total and the couple had gone all out. It was awkward. Story 13. I was a guest, a friend of the bride, and did not know anyone else attending. The venue was very expensive and over the top, with several hundred guests at this distinctly Italian wedding. During the cocktail hour, the maid of honor grabbed the microphone and began a rambling, drunken speech. She claimed the bride's recently deceased mother had been against the wedding and that it had essentially killed her. And she also said Vinny would never give up prostitutes. Several people tackled her and dragged her away. The couple separated and divorced within a year. Story 14. I studied photography and worked as an assistant to a well-known wedding photographer. We photographed a couple's wedding. He shot digital and I shot black and white film. We spent the day with them from 9 a.m. until 2 a.m. the next morning. I could see how genuinely in love they were. It was only one day, but I got to know them quite well and really liked them both. The next morning I received a call from the photographer. His voice was shaky. He explained that the groom had been murdered that night after the reception. 3 men had broken into their bungalow to steal wedding gifts. The groom got out of bed to stop them, and they executed him in front of the bride. I was in shock for about 2 weeks. This happened in South Africa, which may help explain how or why it occurred. The next weekend, the photographer and I went to the bride's house to present her with the photos. We had worked together to get the job massively accelerated so she would have the photos of her husband. We did it at our own expense and did not charge her for the day, the prints, or the album. It was the least we could do, because my photos were less formal. I was able to capture natural moments between them rather than staged portraits. In addition to the standard album pictures, she had about 150 snapshots of them being a couple. She was in tears from the moment we arrived until we left a few hours later. She was a shadow of the woman I had met only a week earlier. That still haunts me. I did not expect this story to get the attention it has. I am sorry for any upset this has caused, but I believe it is an important reality check. I loved South Africa in many ways, but it is a very troubled place with very high murder and rape rates. My story is by no means unique or even particularly shocking by South African standards. I have worse stories like this from friends and neighbors. I developed complex post-traumatic stress disorder from my time living there and the things I endured. I know friends who were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from their time there as well. I hope this dissuades a few people from visiting South Africa and perhaps saves a few lives. Story 15. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk his daughter down the aisle. While we were waiting, the air conditioning failed in the venue. It was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside and very humid. The venue was overcrowded, and you could barely move without bumping into someone else, which made the heat even more miserable. The air conditioning failure also affected the refrigeration, and most of the food had spoiled. The only items on the buffet were salad, spaghetti, and rolls. It was not enough to feed even half the guests. Most people left after the first dance. 2 of the bride's aunts fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were crying. Story 16. The groom was so drunk the night before that he could not make it to the altar at the ceremony. They proceeded with the ceremony with only the bride, her party, and 1 groomsman who remained sober. Everyone there shook their heads. The groom made a brief appearance for a few seconds at the reception. He looked like a zombie and wore street clothes. This was not a low-end wedding. The bride was a professional dancer for a major label pop star, which gives an idea of the attendees. More than 200 people at the ceremony alone and probably twice that number at the reception. They divorced within 6 months. Story 17. 3 days before the wedding, and before the COVID-19 pandemic, the father of the bride died suddenly. For the father-daughter dance, the mother and the bride danced with a photograph of the father. The same arrangement was used when the bride walked down the aisle to be given away. There were many tears and few smiles. Even the hotel bartender knew the night before and spoke to me about it. Story 18. It was a big wedding with more than 300 people. It turned out the bride had been having an affair with her cousin's husband. The cousin had known for some time but waited until the wedding and went from table to table, telling everyone that the bride was sleeping with her husband. The groom was blindsided. The worst part was that his father-in-law, who was well off, had opened a restaurant for him. He lost both his wife and the restaurant. Story 19. My best friend's mother got remarried and had an expensive, beautiful wedding, but for some reason she didn't hire a disc jockey. At the last minute she asked me to manage the compact discs and gave me a list, along with verbal instructions about when to play each song. I tried to warn her that I simply could not follow the instructions, but she said she had confidence in me. Apparently she'd always wanted to walk down the aisle to a specific song, but I couldn't figure out which one. They had to start walking to match the sunset, so she went ahead down the aisle while I flipped through a series of incorrect songs to the horror and amusement of the crowd. For years afterward, when I called my friend's house and her stepfather answered, he would say, "Is this the guy who messed up my wedding? How are you?" Story 20. I work at a golf course with a lot of history. We host wedding receptions in the clubhouse and hold ceremonies outside by the historic water fountain and large pond. The first problem was the weather. I live in the high desert and it reached 90 degrees Fahrenheit that day, and it was very windy. Everyone was outside with no umbrellas and no pop-up canopies. The next problem, and probably the worst, was the golf cart incident. The bride and groom wanted to ride into the sunset on one of our golf carts. The cart apparently had a nail in the tire went flat, and the battery malfunctioned so the cart stopped abruptly, from 15 miles per hour to 0. The wheels and mechanisms locked up, and the couple fell out and rolled a few times. They were mostly okay, with only a few bruises and a bruised ego. Retrieving the cart was difficult. Finally, the power in the clubhouse went out due to the high winds. There was no after-party. Only the cake was cut and hardly any food was served. It was not a great day to be covering for someone on my day off. Story 21. This was a wedding I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, the photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids, so they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. The bride landed, dislocated her knee, then passed out and went in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance, which arrived and treated her knee, but she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and vomited down her dress, and had to sit with her mother in another room while everyone else danced. I felt so bad for her, as she spent the rest of the evening crying. Story 22. I went to a wedding where the bride and groom bought the wedding package on Groupon, which is fine, why spend a fortune for one day? But the venue must have tried to cut corners. They put us in a room that smelled so strongly of cat urine that some people left immediately. The only drinks were from a vending machine. The venue was next to an airport, so every time a plane took off the ceremony had to be paused because you could not hear anything. The day after the event, all of us had food poisoning. Bonus story. It did not ruin the wedding for the couple, but it ruined it for the bridal party. I was a bridesmaid and flew across the world for more than 10 hours to be there. I helped set up the venue, assign people to rooms, put signs on doors, finish the seating chart, transport food, and redo her bouquet because she did not like it, and so on. The whole time she was rude and told everyone nearby that the bridesmaids were not helping. Her maid of honor was bending over backwards to keep her happy, and instead of being grateful, she told her sister that she should have asked her to be maid of honor instead. She was cold to me and kept asking if I had lost weight. I said yes because I had been ill but did not think much of it. At the reception, her new husband read a speech she had clearly written for him and said to me that they were glad I fit into my dress in front of more than 100 people. I do not speak to her anymore, and neither do her maid of honor or the other bridesmaid. Story 23. We attended a wedding for a family member who did not have much money. It was held at a modest but pleasant venue. My heart broke when only a third of the people invited showed up. You could see the hurt on the couple's faces. They came to our table and asked if we had any friends in the city. we lived an hour away. They had food planned for 100 people but only 30 guests. They were willing to invite complete strangers so their money and food would not go to waste. We had not yet given our card with cash inside, so my husband went to an automated teller machine and withdrew an additional $100. Story 24. This is the story of my older cousin. He attended a wedding where the bride and groom were scammed by the wedding planner. 1 hour before the ceremony, the reception room was empty. No food, no decorations, just a few tables. It looked like an unused ballroom. The couple realized they had been swindled. The planner had used the money to buy a large house. When the bride and groom went to confront the planner, they found him sleeping at home. The case was covered on national television, and the planner was later sued by several other couples who had also been scammed. Story 25. The mother of the bride, who was drunk, stumbled into a lake. Story 26. Maybe not ruined, but it definitely got tense. It started with the best man, the groom's brother, absolutely roasting the bride and her parents. He called them gold diggers in front of several hundred family members and friends. Then they cut the cake. Apparently the groom was told in no uncertain terms not to shove cake in her face. He did it anyway, and she stormed off, not to be seen for 20 minutes. The reception went on as planned. She drank heavily, and I am told she passed out that night in the middle of the street while still in her wedding dress. They are divorced now. Story 27. I was invited to the reception for one of my good friends. They had been married at the courthouse for months and were living happily. When I arrived at the venue and saw the large crowd, I knew something was wrong. My friend's wife is prone to panic attacks and is extremely agoraphobic, to the point of breaking down and crying when overwhelmed. I immediately called my friend to ask what was going on and whether this was okay. It turned out his parents had invited everyone possible to be there without his knowledge. After I sent him a picture of the crowd, he and his wife decided it would be better to go on a second honeymoon than to have a reception. He sent a message apologizing to everyone they had invited and asking them to leave, without telling his parents. His parents had a meltdown as we left. Story 28. This was around 2009. On the second day of the wedding in Tenerife, the bride went swimming in the ocean and swam out too far. She was effectively lost at sea for 9 hours. She eventually made it back but was in very bad shape. Everyone panicked all day and thought she had drowned. By the time she returned, she said she wished she had. Her husband found her phone and read many messages that were supposedly from her aunt. It quickly became clear from the sexual content that they were not from her aunt. She had apparently been having an affair with the best man for years. They obtained an annulment shortly after. 60,000 down the drain. It was one of the most opulent weddings I have ever attended. Story 29. A fight broke out between the father of the bride, her brother, and a hotel guest. It did not seem like a real fight so much as the father and brother assaulting the man. Both were arrested. The bride sobbed at breakfast because her father and brother had spent the night of her wedding in jail and now faced assault charges. Story 30. Hurricane Ivan hit us. Our wedding was scheduled for Friday, and the hurricane hit us directly on Thursday. We had no power on Friday and remembered that a neighbor was a pastor. So my partner and I knocked on his front door and asked if he would marry us in the front yard. The big church wedding was canceled, but instead we were married in the front yard with chainsaws in the background. We have been married 17 years now. Story 31. The groom's father groped both the bride and his daughter, my then-girlfriend, multiple times. He was punched by his son and then locked in a minivan for a few hours until he sobered up. He had been belligerently drunk. His hands were duct-taped behind his back, and with the rear child locks engaged he could not get out. He was too intoxicated to find the front seat unlocks while his hands were taped. Story 32. I used to work at a fairly upscale catering hall in New Jersey while I was in college, and I witnessed 2 ruined weddings. The first is simple. The bride and the best man were caught in a car. The second story is worse. A couple of the groomsmen asked for and were given access to the reception room during cocktail hour to help with decorating. That was unusual. We got through the courses fine, And one thing became very clear to the staff. The bride's side of the family was very conservative. They did not drink, they barely danced, and they watched wide-eyed as the groom's side of the party went wild. Then it was time for speeches. About halfway through his speech, the best man said something like, "Hey, bride's family, I know you think your girl is so sweet and innocent and Christian, and that they are the perfect couple, but if you want to see what they're really like, look under your seat." Taped under every chair was a picture of the bride and groom caught in the act. The groomsmen and their friends roared with laughter, but the bride's side was furious. So many fights broke out that night, the wedding was basically over. Story 33. A friend of my girlfriend was getting married. They were married in the local church, and the reception was in a nice restaurant. The photographer asked the bride and her bridesmaids to go outside for some photos. My girlfriend was one of them. A few minutes later, one of the bridesmaids came back asking for help. Some swans had attacked the photographer, and most people nearby did little more than laugh at the man who was running and screaming. Story 34. I went to a coworker's wedding about 15 years ago. This happened at the reception at a beautiful outdoor venue overlooking a lake. The groom had planned to sing a song to his new wife and have fireworks launch as he sang the last note. The last note came, but the fireworks did not. He held the last note for about 10 seconds before finally shouting "motherfuckers," throwing the microphone down, and running to confront the fireworks technician. No fists were thrown, but someone ended up in the lake. The party broke up after that. They divorced about a year later after the groom was fired for exposing himself to his boss's underage daughter. I am sorry to say that after 15 years I do not remember the song, but the last word of the song was "Baby A." I do not think it was "Kissed by a Rose" by Seal. Thanks to a commenter, I now know the song was "When I'm With You" by Sheriff. Story 35. Not as dramatic as some comments I've seen, but very awkward. I was at a lovely candlelit wedding and the reception was lovely. The best man gave a good speech. At the end he said, "Everybody raise your glasses to," and after saying the groom's name he accidentally called the bride by the groom's ex-wife's name. Story 36. This did not ruin the wedding, but it did not brighten my day. After the ceremony we stood in front of the altar, and people took turns congratulating us. When it was my mother's turn, she took my hand and said she was sorry for raising someone like me. Thank God my husband does not speak her language well. Story 37. It rained and was cold. No one bothered to turn the lights on, so the few pictures I have are dark and grainy. My parents divorced earlier that year, so my father hated seeing my mother for the first time and did not stay to take a picture with me. My husband's mother did not even take time off work to attend. Apparently the money was more important. The good news is that we just celebrated our 49th wedding anniversary. Edit. Thank you to everyone for the kind words and rewards. This is the biggest response I have received since joining Reddit. Thank you. Story 38. It was a very beautiful wedding in a huge barn at an apple orchard. They must have spent a ton of money on the decorations and catering because it looked like something out of a magazine. The ceremony was great. The flower girl did her part and the vows left. Everyone choked up. Everything seemed to be going well. Not even 15 minutes into the reception, the mothers of the bride and groom got into a full brawl with hair pulling and red wine thrown. Their sons jumped in to defend them. Chairs were thrown and tables were flipped. Parents grabbed children and ran for their lives. The couple was horrified and left immediately for their honeymoon suite. My fiancé and I left after this as well, but we heard from friends that most people stayed and drank at the open bar at the couple's expense. Apparently the fight started because one of the groom's sisters complimented the bride's grandmother's dress. The bride's mother thought she was being sarcastic and called her a bitch, and then the drama escalated. Many of them had been pre-drinking before the wedding. Story 39. I have been to a few, but this is the most soap opera-like one. I was setting up a dessert table at my old country club job when people started arriving. Keep in mind, the actual marriage ceremony was supposed to be happening at that moment, so nothing was fully set up. The couple was nowhere to be found. Felt more like a funeral, just people talking quietly among themselves. I found the wedding photographer chatting with a bridesmaid. Apparently, the couple was very Christian, conservative, and young, about 19 or 20. The groom had been sent to a pray away the gay camp as a high school student after being caught dating his best friend. He had been there for about a year. He came back, met this girl, and they decided to get married. He ran into the man he had dated about 2 months before the wedding and realized he missed their friendship. So they started hanging out again. As the wedding drew near, he realized, "What am I doing?" and began to panic. The night before the wedding, he went to the other man's house, realized he was still gay and wanted to be with him, and called the bride to tell her he was not showing up. She refused to accept it. She went through the whole process of getting ready, took pictures, and went to the venue where he did not appear. She lost her mind on speakerphone at the church where everyone could hear, while he was yelling, "I am gay, I like men, I love him, and my parents cannot force me anymore. This is not about you, and you will thank me in the long run." Story 40. A coworker attended a best friend's wedding. There were very specific rules about the food. No nuts. A couple of people there, including the maid of honor, had severe nut allergies. The venue served something that contained nuts, and the maid of honor had an anaphylactic reaction. An epinephrine autoinjector was not effective, and she died on the way to the hospital. Needless to say, multiple lawsuits followed. Story 41. This happened to my classmate. He was a successful mid-level manager, divorced, about 35 years old. He found the girl of his dreams, but she was from a poor provincial town and insisted on having the wedding there to show off her success. The wedding was disrupted by her old friends, including some unsophisticated men who harbored tense feelings toward the groom from the city. A fight broke out during the wedding. The groom tried to stop it and was stabbed in the back. He died there. He was my classmate. Story 42. I am a wedding photographer. A couple of years ago, I worked a very fancy outdoor wedding at a swanky, remote venue. The venue had a long concrete stairway flanked by water fountains that led down to the altar, so the bride could be seen by everyone as if she were coming down from heaven. The ceremony began and the bridal party took their places. The bride appeared with her father. After descending 3 or 4 steps, her shoe twisted, and she tumbled down about 12 feet, breaking most of her front teeth and bleeding heavily. Because the venue was so isolated, it took about 40 minutes for an ambulance to arrive, and she was in intense pain. Ultimately, she was all right, and I received an email from them weeks later with the rescheduled date. This time, there were no stairs in sight. Story 43. I worked a wedding in upstate New York for a catering company. It was at a summer camp with the ceremony on the lake and the reception in a mess hall. It was in September, so I assumed the camp was trying to make extra money after the children went back to school. The ceremony went off without incident. During the reception, the camp owners noticed a building fire across the lake. A building from the 1800s burned down. At the same time, the father of the bride slipped on the dance floor and split his head open. An ambulance was called and he went to the hospital, where he received stitches. The place was chaotic with fire trucks and ambulances. The bride and groom got into a massive fight. The disc jockey packed up and left around 8:30, and the wedding was over. I proceeded to drink my weight in Yanglings and sleep in my car. I made good tips, though. Story 44. The bride began her menstrual period on her wedding day and felt nauseous and in pain all day. She could not eat any of the buffet because her stomach hurt, and anything she tried to eat she immediately vomited. She could not even stand properly because of severe cramps, so she remained seated. In most of the wedding photos she is grimacing rather than smiling because she was so unwell. Story 45. I was waitressing at a function lounge hosting a wedding reception. The music started but nobody came in for a solid 30 seconds, so the disc jockey cut the music. Everyone heard loud arguing in the foyer for about a minute when 2 men stumbled into the hall, both bloodied and fighting each other. It was the groom and the bride's brother. It turned out the groom's side of the family did not want him to marry the bride, and the groom decided at the reception that he agreed with his family. Long story short, more people got involved in the fight, the police were called, and the bride was understandably a tearful mess. But she decided that since she had spent so much money on the event, they would have a party with or without the groom. Honestly, she was much stronger than I could have been. Good on her for that, but the whole thing was an absolute mess. Story 46. I was invited to the wedding of a friend's friend because the bride didn't have enough people to make the reception as big as she wanted. The bride and groom were very young. They got pregnant 3 months after hooking up and married for the wrong reasons. The atmosphere at the party felt forced and strained, and everyone seemed to know it was somehow fake, so I spent my time outside with the smokers. I was having a wonderful time until we heard screaming inside. The bride ran past us in a very Hollywood-style, teary, dramatic way. It turned out the ice cake had not been stored properly. It was slightly defrosted and a little lopsided. The bride did not return. The cake was still really nice. The couple divorced 9 months later. Story 47. I met this man in a night college class. He was my study partner. He always wore some kind of crazy outfit. All leather and sunglasses indoors like Riddick, or Wolverine-style sideburns dyed purple with John Lennon-style purple shades. Turned out he had bad teeth and came from a terrible childhood. His mother pawned his things for drugs, and the outfits were a distraction from his teeth, which he was terribly self-conscious about. He was the kindest person I had ever met and quickly became one of my best friends. He fell in love with an African-American woman he worked with. He was white, and she loved him as much as he loved her. As soon as her family found out, things got ugly, and they ended up living in my spare bedroom for a year. Her father was a preacher and wasn't thrilled that she was dating a poor white man with bad teeth. Her mother, though, was devastated. They decided to get married in a civil ceremony. Show up, wait in line, get your certificate. I was the best man and did what I could to make it a happy occasion. Her father, to his credit, tried to put a bold face on it, but her mother wept loudly through the entire procedure. After the wedding, in a quiet moment with the father, I told him my friend had a heart of pure gold. I offered to take them anywhere they wanted for their first married meal, and, bless them, they chose Hometown Buffet. 6 years later, they had an 18-month-old son. He was at home with the baby when he dropped dead of a massive heart attack at age 34 or 35. I went to his funeral and watched his mother-in-law and father-in-law weep and tell story after story about his kindness and love. At the end, I shook hands with his father-in-law, and all he said was, "Heart of gold." Story 48. My dad had veteran and vintage cars. When I was younger, he used to do some weddings with them. I loved clearing out the confetti from the cars when he got home. One week he arrived back and there was no confetti in the car. On the way to the church, the bride changed her mind. Instead of taking her and her father to church, they asked if he could drop them at the local zoo because it was her favorite place. He did, leaving them there in full wedding attire. They planned to get a taxi home when they were done. It was the days before mobile phones, so I guess people waited at the church for quite a while. Veteran cars were made before 1919. Vintage cars were made between 1919 and 1930 in the United Kingdom. I called my dad to ask if he remembered this. He thinks, from what he overheard, that she was only getting married because she was pregnant and felt she had to. It was the early 1980s. He also told me he did 2 weddings where the groom never showed up. Story 49. This happened to my uncle's neighbor while attending a wedding. The groom's mother had a pacemaker that could not withstand all the commotion. People did not notice she had died until someone went to her table. Everything went sour. The honeymoon was canceled and there was a month-long mourning period. It was a very sad evening. Story 50. A $28,000 wedding paid for by the father of the bride. The groom suffered alcohol poisoning and was taken to the hospital 30 minutes before the ceremony. The father was not happy. There was, however, an extra $600 cake. Story 51. A close friend of mine, a wedding photographer, was waiting at the altar when the best man announced that the groom was coming out as gay and the wedding was canceled. Everyone laughed as if it were a joke, but it was serious. The bride was on the way in the car and she was not happy. All the guests had to wait while they sorted things out. In the end, they divided the reception room in 2 and each family had its own dinner. Needless to say, they did not want the photos. Story 52. The groom caught the bride in the restroom with another man during the reception. He forgave her, but about 2 months later he caught her again with a different man. A third one. Story 53. My wedding was ruined by a tornado. It touched down about 15 minutes after the ceremony and became one of my favorite wedding memories. Many of the extra guests did not come to the reception, which made it a great party. Our outdoor decorations were ruined, but it did not matter. We also got a few striking pictures of my wife and me with storm clouds and green skies. Story 54. I worked at a historic house used as a wedding and party venue. It was built in the early 1800s, had 2 floors, and the upstairs was the bride's ready room. I learned 2 things there. Many women wanted to have sex in their wedding dresses with someone other than the groom just before the ceremony, and buildings over 200 years old have incredibly thin floors. Story 55. Not ruined exactly, but a hilarious moment. It was a Christian wedding where the pastor refused to say "You may now kiss the bride." The bride knew this going in but insisted he say it and had convinced herself he would change his mind. He did not say it at the end of the ceremony. The bride, who had a few drinks before walking down the aisle, then grabbed her new husband by the face and made out with him for what felt like a solid 3 minutes. At first everyone clapped and cheered, but eventually the applause died and we were left with 2 people making out intensely, in absolute silence, tongue and all, in front of 300 people. I was a groomsman, so I saw the stunned reaction of the entire crowd. Her grandparents and the older guests were visibly uncomfortable. Story 56. During a mixed-gender bachelor party, the bride-to-be got into an argument with the groom and slept with another man. The wedding was called off the next morning. They lost more than $10,000. He took her back a couple of months later. Story 57. The groom's brother was the best man. One of the bride's sisters served as maid of honor and the other sisters were bridesmaids. The best man's wife was upset that she had not been asked to be a bridesmaid and persuaded him not to attend the wedding without warning. We sat in the church for almost an hour while they tried to find the best man. A friend stood in as best man, but the brothers' relationship was never the same. Story 58. A woman my partner went to school with was getting married. We were invited but declined because she had been a huge bully to my partner during high school. 2 of my partner's friends were her bridesmaids and told me about the train wreck of a ceremony. In the lead up to the big day, the woman chose her perfect princess dress. For the next 9 months she ate takeout and gained a lot of weight. A month before the wedding, during a fitting, she could not fit into the dress and was crying in the changing room. Her mother dragged the bridesmaids into the changing room and pressured them to tell the bride she was beautiful no matter what, but that she needed to go on a juice cleanse and diet until the wedding. They refused, and the mother gently told the bride to do the cleanse. A month later, the bride had lost a few kilograms and it was time for the big day. She arrived at the very fancy chapel. The reception was there too, $300 per person with over 100 guests. As she walked down the aisle, there was a ripping sound. Halfway down the aisle, her dress tore. Guests scrambled to cover the tear. She made it to her future husband and they were married. At the reception, after the speeches, she became very drunk and began to dance aggressively. After hours of drinking and dancing, the dress tore further and by the end of the night she was essentially in her underwear. Needless to say, we missed a chaotic night. Story 59. My friend had a wedding at a beautiful tree farm. A horse-drawn carriage brought the bride in. There was a beautiful waterfall and rolling hills. At first it was raining like a hurricane, Noah's Ark kind of rain. They had to move the ceremony to the pavilion where the reception was held. The white horses pulling the carriage slipped and slopped until they were covered with mud. One of the groomsmen grabbed a 40-ounce bottle of Crazy Horse, chugged it, and then decided he needed to fight a friend of mine. As they were taking photos, he flipped the man onto the staging area, knocking over a large flower display. He ended up rolling down a muddy hill in his tuxedo, wandering into a random house, and falling asleep on their couch. The friend who had to avoid the fight had an ex at the wedding who was now dating one of his friends. She loudly announced that she still loved him. It was one thing after another. I felt so bad for the happy couple. The groom's uncle went up to him right before the ceremony and said he had left his car outside with the keys in the ignition, his passport, and $2,000 in the glove box in case he changed his mind. Story 60. Not as funny as some of these stories, but the power went out. The vicar started talking about rings and putting Vaseline on them, which made us hysterically laugh in the church pews because we were being immature. One best man left early because he hated the bride. The other got so drunk that, after breaking things, standing on tables, and loudly telling everyone the groom should not have married her, he was kicked out by the police. It was an absolute mess. Nobody thought they should have married. We had a great time and got completely drunk. They are divorced now. Story 61. My mother was a church organist and attended many weddings. The story that stands out was about a bride who, when asked, "Do you take this man?" broke down, said, "No, I can't. I don't love him," and ran out of the church. It was a small town. People learned that she had met someone new and had fallen hopelessly in love with him. Story 62. The wedding was scheduled for March 14th, 2020. A lot happened in the 3 days before, and the venue canceled about 24 hours before. The bride was devastated, but the groom, the bride's brother, and the bridal party, including 2 dogs, pulled an all-nighter and the ceremony went on in the couple's backyard. Although the wedding was technically ruined, it served as an excellent reminder that the marriage is the important part. Story 63. My best friend is the son of the best man and the bride. He was conceived at the wedding and raised by the couple. Story 64. It was a big wedding, about 500 people. It was all the bride's doing. She wanted a huge, $70,000 wedding. I was a groomsman. Before the wedding, he was extremely nervous. With so many people, it had to be perfect. This was her dream wedding. At some point, the whiskey came out. What started as a few shots to calm his nerves became him nearly finishing the bottle. We gave him water, put him in the shower, and dressed him again. It was time. Midway through her vows, he vomited down the front of her dress. It was horrible, but it turned out well. They have been together for almost 8 years. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.